This episode of The Unstarving Musician is powered by liner notes. If you would like to learn from the hundreds of musicians and industry professionals I've spoken with for The Unstarving Musician on topics such as marketing, the songwriting process, touring, sync licensing, and more, sign up for liner notes. It's an email newsletter from yours truly, in which I share some of the best knowledge gems I've garnered from the many conversations I've had for the Unstarving Musician podcast. You'll also find out about upcoming podcast episodes as well as occasional liner notes subscriber exclusives. Sign up at unstarvingmusician.com. It's free and you can unsubscribe at any time. This is The Unstarving Musician. I am your host, Robonzo. This podcast features conversations with music artists, songwriters, and industry pros, and me. It's intended to help music artists better understand the marketing, business, and creative processes that empower us to do more of what we love. Make music. Hey man, before we get into today's guest, if your band doesn't have a website, if you or your band doesn't have a website, I'd like you to check out Unstarving Musician episodes 237 and 239, which are all about websites for musicians and bands. These are the first in a series of episodes on musician websites, so if this is a topic you want to learn more about, please check them out. Just look for episodes 237 and 239 at unstarvingmusician.com or on your favorite podcast app. And in big Robonzo news, my friend Jerry Palmer and his family are visiting us being the wife and I, from Colorado. We met and played in a couple of Texas bands, Jerry and I, way back in the 90s. I'm really excited to see him, his wife and daughter, and we might even get to record and perform together during his short visit. So I'm stoked, as the skater kids used to say. My guest for this episode is Jann Klose. He is an award-winning pop singer-songwriter who's released 6 albums and 2 EPs. Klose was raised in Kenya, South Africa, Germany, and the United States. His newest single, Sugar My, Love You the Most, I should say singles, and Pilot Light have accumulated over 5 million streams across all platforms. Love You the Most, part of the soundtrack to the Amazon film Married Young, even broke top 40 radio in the United States, peaking at number 49. Jann is an ambassador for the Desmond TutuDesk campaign, love the name of that, and Brick Uganda. He's the singing voice of Tim Buckley in the movie Greetings from Tim Buckley, a Universal film. His songs have been heard on the Grammy-nominated Healthy Food for Thought compilation, charted in the Billboard Top 10 compilation Action Moves People United, as well as MTV Cribs and movies Dead Broke by Warner Brothers featuring Paul Sorvino and One Little Finger alongside Quincy Jones, Siedah, did I get that right? Siedah, Garrett, and Julian Lennon. He has performed as an actor and singer in touring companies of Broadway musicals, including Jesus Christ Superstar, Jekyll and Hyde, and The Who's Tommy, as well as made for TV movies, voiceovers, and commercials. In 2020, Jann launched his podcast, Making Sound with Jann Klose. Recent episodes have featured industry legends like Annie Haslam of Renaissance, Frank Bello of Anthrax, and Simon Kirke of Bad Company. Jann tours year-round in North America, Europe, Africa, and Asia, and has opened for and collaborated with a wide range of artists, including Pat Benatar, John Oates of Hall & Oates, Suzanne Vega, Roseanne Cash, Paula Cole, among many others. You can find out, lest we forget to mention, everything about Jann at jannklose.com. That's JANNKLOSE. Jann, welcome to The Unstarving Musician.
Hello, I'm not hungry anymore.
Good.
How are you doing?
Doing well, thank you. So yes, it's kind of there in your bio. When I first came across you, I saw all this music work you've done, but yeah, I noted that you do some acting, vocal coaching, and voiceover work, which I'd love to talk about, but I thought we could start with how and where, we mentioned it, but sort of a little more depth into how and where you grew up.
Yeah, so I was born in Germany. My parents are German, but my dad worked for BASF.
Oh, cool.
He's retired now, but then he worked for BASF, which is, one of the biggest producers of chemicals in the world. And he was in and fertilizers. He sold fertilizers, and that was his MO. And because his English was good, he was moved to the Nairobi, Kenya office, and then the Johannesburg, South Africa office. So for BASF, and so I spent my first 11 years of life in Africa. So my brother was actually born in Nairobi. I have a half sister who was born in Johannesburg, and that's kind of the short version. And then as a teenager, we lived in Germany, my brother and I, with our grandparents, and then I came to the U.S. as an exchange student and stayed more or less. That's the very short version.
And do I remember right? You were an exchange student in
A version of
yeah,
exchange, yeah,
yeah.
always.
In was that in Cleveland, Ohio? Is that right?
Yes, Cleveland, Ohio, the capital of rock and roll. That's what they call it.
Is that how you ended up there?
So, well, like my a friend of mine, Joey Reynolds, who's a talk show host, or he's also retired now, but he used to have me on his show on WOR radio in New York City, and I would come on the show, and he would introduce me and talk about that I was an exchange student in Cleveland, and that I'm from Germany, and that they sent me to Cleveland for punishment.
That's great. I love
Because
it.
Cleveland always has that uh, it's like the butt of the joke. It used to be anyway. I don't think it's so much anymore, but it wasn't so much when I was there, but because it already changed a lot. But yeah, anyway.
And they had those Cleveland Browns who are no longer the butt of everyone's joke these days in NFL football. So
Yeah, right. I don't really follow football. I have no idea what's happening with that. But no, Cleveland's really come a long way when you think about it. Like they had the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and they have a very successful basketball team and
mhm.
uh, baseball team, and a great classical music scene, a great live music scene, theater. I mean, it's kind of like a small Chicago, but I don't want to insult any Clevelanders. So, and I love going there. I'm actually playing there again in November of this year, of 2022. So yeah, all good.
Cool. Do you identify the Cleveland area as maybe a little more home than some of the other areas that you've been? Although, are you still in? I read that
I'm in
you
New York.
okay in the Bronx
Yeah.
still. Okay, is
No, no,
that
I left the Bronx last year.
okay?
I owned a place up there, and I sold it, and I moved to Astoria, Queens. And I like it here much better. It's much closer to the city, and there's a lot more to do in the neighborhood. I was living in a very quiet. I mean, that was nice when I was traveling a lot in the
Hmm.
Bronx. I was living in a very quiet neighborhood, but it's very far from the city. It was like north or just northeast of the New York Botanical Gardens, so quite far to the city. So it didn't matter so much when I wasn't when I was touring a lot, which I'm
Hmm.
now starting to again. But when the pandemic hit and I was home all the time, I was going crazy there. It's like there was nothing to do, so I made a move.
Oh, good for you.
Uh,
And you recorded an
Thanks.
album too, right?
And I recorded an album, and I started a podcast, and so it's I'm not good at sitting still, so I did do that, and we just finished it. We're in the very, very final editing stage, so we're about to go to mastering with the record.
Cool. Yeah, I was looking at all these things you've done, and you were touring, and about looks like that's starting to ramp back up. And then I saw you
Yes,
did a podcast.
finally.
Yeah, and then I saw you have the podcast, and I'm like, okay, I know how much work that is for sure, piled on
Hmm.
top of all that other stuff. So,
Yeah.
but it makes I understand now. You had some what felt like downtime, so you found some other things to do. I want to
Yeah.
ask before we get off of your growing up the way you did within the well, I guess in South Africa and then as an exchange student and maybe even some of that before. Now you're in New York. Do you think that any of those travels and places where you've lived, do you feel they have a very strong influence on what you've done artistically?
Oh yeah, of course. I think I'm very open to music of all styles, and people and art, and and I love to travel. So it's I definitely think it has made me a more rounded individual. I'm pretty sure of that.
Yeah.
I don't have hardly any hang-ups. I just kind of I try to look at everything for what it is. And I think we were very lucky to be exposed to a lot of African music when we were kids, and seeing a lot of Southern and Eastern Africa and a lot of Europe. And so when I came to the US, and especially when I came to New York, that's when I really felt it the most. Because when I arrived in New York, I felt like this is the world. Everyone looks different here. This is how I grew up. Like I always felt a lot more comfortable in this kind of an environment that's more diverse and multifaceted culturally than the opposite of that. So I think that it's definitely influenced my writing too, because I tend to be very interested in eclectic styles or instruments. And like on the new album we have a lira for the first time, which is a Greek instrument. And I don't have a specific connection to Greece, but the instrument just felt perfect for that particular song, and I'd never used it before, and I was delighted to get a new sound onto my record. So I try to do that with every album, to have something on there and this is number 7, to have something on there that is different, that isn't normally used in pop music.
Sure. For myself and for listeners, can you, as best you can, describe the African music that you were exposed to, what that's like?
Sure. Yeah, there was and like I still listen to this music to this day. There was of course, like, anytime we would travel, African culture is rooted in music. It's and art. It's like, I mean, actually, you can't see this because it's a podcast, but a piece that's behind me is a print from Johannesburg, and it always reminds me that it's the culture that I grew up in is rooted in connection. And the music is the same for me there. Look, there were always musical performances. There are always people on the street. Street musicians are everywhere, and I always loved that. And there was a specific musical that actually ran in Johannesburg when we were kids, called Ipintombia, in English, The Warrior. And it actually had a London run. It became popular enough that it got exported and had a short West End run in London, I think. I'm not sure exactly when that was, but it was still running in South Africa in the 80s when we were little. And I think it started out in the early 70s. So it had already been around for a long time. But the singer in the show, or on the recording, was Margaret Singana, who is one of the most famous voices of Africa. And I still listen to that music, which is sort of rooted in South African styles, but incorporates a lot of American rock, pop, blues, which is kind of a full circle thing, because the blues is an American art form. The blues, jazz are original American art forms via Africa. So very very interesting to think about how music travels, and touches people and stays with you. And I think that's probably why I pursued music, because of how it made me feel.
Yeah, that's cool. I'll have to check some of that music out. It'll be a first for me, I'm sure. As part of your new album, you have, I believe it's part of your new album, correct me if I'm wrong, but Sugar My, a single that dropped in April. Okay.
Yes.
Can you just talk a little bit about that song, inspiration,
Sure.
or anything else that comes to mind, and
Sure.
even if it's about the recording?
Yeah, no, look, that was that song is starting to develop a life of its own. We have it in two. It's in two charts. It's charting in South Africa and in the US. and getting, did well on is doing well on YouTube. And we did a really fun music video for it, with a lot of dancing and a lot of uh, a little bit like subliminal themes. People can check it out and figure it out for themselves. I don't want to give it away, but it was a really fun project to to film and to perform. Alex Forbes is my co-writer on it, and I did a lot of writing with her for this record. And we met just before the pandemic, and we got together to write, even though we weren't supposed to, go out and see anybody, and that doesn't work for me. So, or for her. And so we both said, hey, screw it, we're just gonna go do what we're gonna do anyway. And we got together for regular writing sessions, and she is one of those people that, the writing sessions were a little bit like therapy sessions, because we could both spill our guts, to what was going on with our lives and
Sure.
what we were witnessing, which was really difficult, for the entertainment industry as a whole, because we were affected by it first and last, and maybe the most, the restaurant industry and the entertainment industry, hospitality obviously as well. But so we wrote about it. They say write about what you know, and what we were experiencing was this like topsy-turvy, upside down world that we were from one day to the next kicked into. And so we use this analogy of Alice in Wonderland in the song, where, we've been given something and we don't quite know what it is, but it's making everything seem out of proportion and nothing fits. And you don't know if it's up, if it's down. So that's the chorus, and that's the lyric we used, and that's the analogy that we came up with, and it worked. I think we love that song, and people seem to like it a lot too.
I'll have to check out the video again. I did watch some of it, and I enjoy talking about songs in the way that you just did, or with what you just shared with guests after I've maybe heard them or seen them or not, and then going back, especially if I have seen or heard any of it, and going back and trying to check it out with new ears and eyes and ears. Yeah, I never thought about this before. You were using the Alice in Wonderland analogy of how upside down everything seemed, and I kept thinking, wow, I guess this is dystopia, but in a weird way, they're very much alike. That Alice in Wonderland,
Yes.
upside downness and dystopia. Right?
Yeah.
So I'd read about a piece from several years back about a song that you wrote called "The Kite," and there was a quote there that said it was about a person in my life, really important to me, who was really strung out. Sorry, I didn't read that entirely accurately, kind of paraphrasing, and that you wanted to lift him up.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about that experience, and maybe any related sort of experience or feelings you have had in your lifetime or at that specific time?
Wow. I mean, when I wrote that, it was a long time ago, but people still bring this song up to me, and it's always a request, and I don't play it that much, because it kind of reminds me of that, and like sometimes songs will bring back memories, and sometimes they're not always good. But this was, I was, I don't know. I get a lot of enjoyment and satisfaction, I should say, out of inspiring others and lifting people up, and sometimes to the, for better or for worse, because sometimes I get too invested in that kind of situation or relationship, and I forget myself a little bit. And I think that's a danger I think in all relationships, I think that's a danger, and I've walked into that trap many times. But I just love uh, doing that. I just really love helping
Sure.
people. And I've gotten a lot better about not overextending myself as I've gotten older, and creating more of a balance there. And that's probably something I should write about, because that would make a good subject, and probably a good continuation of that, because it was so about the kite, the song "The Kite," which was on my album Mosaic. Um, it really is all about them and lifting them up, and I think that's great, and it's important to lift people up. But I think it's important that you don't forget yourself in the during that process, and I have done that, but I've gotten better about it. So there's more of a balance now. But yeah, that's the story behind that one.
Nice. I was just thinking as you were talking about that helping others, I find myself getting a little wrapped around the axle of my own head thinking about, wanting to help someone or having attempted to, with words. Usually, typically, this is what comes to mind. And there are these moments where it didn't seem like it helped much. And then by contrast, I'll have people come back into my life from long ago, and perhaps this has happened to you, that they tell me how much I had inspired them or helped them, or how much they look up to me for something, and I'm like, what? I had no idea, and I don't remember ever doing anything particularly inspiring for that person. But I guess it's. I just wanted to comment on that because if you are, I think we all wish we could help people and want to help people, and I guess it's good for us to remember that sometimes we do so without even realizing it, and most often probably when we don't realize we've done it.
Yeah, I was going to say, the answer to that is it's probably because you do it all the time.
Yeah, maybe. It's nice though, when somebody tells you that for sure. And I guess in our lives, we are often helped by people who have no idea. And I've had that thought too, like that person has no idea how much they mean to me. And which, prompts me to think I should let them know if I haven't already.
Yeah, it's good to give and not expect anything back. I think the expectation part is what you have to watch out for, either from you or from the other, individual or individuals. The balance part is the tough part, I think.
Sure.
In life, to create balance, period.
Yeah. I'd read also, probably from the same article or maybe from another one in the same period, that at around 2009 you had been working hard to build a fan base in Germany, France, and England and Ireland, but that you were at that moment in time building momentum in the States. And I don't know if you remember this being written.
Yeah, that was a crazy time. I was touring so much.
How do you, I mean, it looks to me that you have developed a good following, just kind of looking at what you're doing on social and with some of the accolades, of course, and things that we discussed at the top of the show. But how do you feel things have progressed since 2009 in the efforts to build a fan base and a following and supporters?
Well, that was kind of when things really started to click, because I opened for Renaissance, and then I got cast in Greetings from Tim Buckley as the voice of Tim Buckley, the singing voice. And, it just gave me a really big jumping off point, and I used it, because those moments sort of don't come on very often. Like there's those once in a lifetime career spots where, something happens and you just have to get on the horse because there's not going to be another one for a while, maybe.
Yeah.
But in my case, they kind of kept coming after that, and things just started building and building. And then I was asked to make a record in South Africa after I, was reintroduced to that market through a BMI writers camp, and first through also a news article that the Sunday Times ran, and my favorite fourth grade teacher in South Africa read it and contacted me and said, "Oh, you must come and sing at the anniversary of the school that you attended." And through that, other things started snowballing, and I met an agent who I'm still working with there, and then eventually when In Tandem came out, and was picked up by Gallo, which is the biggest record company in South Africa and the oldest in Africa. And then that really just kicked things onto a much higher level, because we started getting so much airplay on the radio there, and the listenership for some of the songs is, in the millions, tens of millions. And it seems abstract now, but like I didn't expect that when I walked into that writing session. I was just like, I'm here to write a song, but you never know what's going to happen. But like, if one of those, you write 100 songs and one of them becomes a hit, and everything changes. And that's what happened. But it took a long time. It took years to get to that point, and then other things followed after that. And you can never really rest, because there's always more that you can do. There's always another level, and we're trying to do that now. We're trying to get more sales for tickets, and break into new markets, and play on bigger stages, and have a bigger band. And so there's always something there's always growth that has to follow that success, because you learn a lot more from the failures, to be honest. The things that don't work out, those are the things that you really have to go, okay, how can I turn that around? The successes are really like, it's crazy how the irony of that works, but it does. And as soon as you start getting comfortable with something, if you start coasting, the only way is down. Like my friend Dan Beck always says this, if you have a success and you start coasting, the only way is down.
That's sounds like really good advice.
It's true.
So if you could shift the lens to either this point in time, or maybe 6 months, 12 months back, or whatever time period you choose, can you think of something that, or what comes to mind if I ask you what's working? What have you found worked really well for you in terms of keeping the momentum going and building things with, all these things we talked about, from the fan base building to breaking into new markets?
The thing that still works the best is live performances.
Okay.
Because it's connecting with an audience and meeting people. And there's still nothing that will take the place of that. There's no Zoom show that will ever make up for feeling that energy in a room with people.
Yeah.
And it's also the hardest thing to do, and the hardest thing to organize. The work that goes into it is, for that hour or hour and a half that you're on stage, is in the multiples, for that one moment. But that's why that moment is so special, I think. So I think that's still the best vehicle that you have especially as a songwriter and singer, performer. If you're just a songwriter, then that's different. But I like the live performance aspect.
And I had read that, I don't recall the exact number. In fact, I kind of glazed over it, but you have in your career had years where you're doing well in excess of 100 shows. So touring has been obviously very important to you. I guess that's fair to say, yes, the entire time.
Yeah, that it almost killed me when I did that, but yeah. Yeah, it's definitely, it's a very hard life. I try to be more selective about that now, like I try to be very specific about what the shows are that I'm doing, when I'm doing them, where, and what kind of a setup. And I don't always have that choice, but when I do, I try to apply that, so that, because you also have to remain sane. You have to keep an amount of control and sanity and mental health, physical health, because it's very, very demanding.
Sure.
In multiple aspects. So I'm trying to be better about that. Whereas, when I was first starting to do this, I was just like, any gig, give me a gig. I don't care what it is. I don't care where it is. I don't care who's coming. Just, I want to play. Now that's a little different.
Sure. And there are so many going way back to my youth. I'd heard so many times from, particularly if you're working with or learning from somebody who's a seasoned professional, in the beginning, they'll say, take every gig. And I've never
Yeah.
really been that way, probably because I've never done this full time. Absolutely because I've never done this full time. But in fact, I've always been very choosy about it, or in more recent years anyway. In the beginning, you're just excited to play anywhere, of course. But just a couple more questions here. And this
Hmm.
next one may not really go anywhere, but I am curious. And I say it may not go anywhere because I've asked about it before and I haven't really gotten a lot from anyone. But I noticed on your website when I went to go look at, I don't know if it's a tour's heading, but anyway, it's where you're playing. And the first thing I saw was, check out bands in town for the latest schedule. And I thought, oh, wow, that's your entire page on the website. It wasn't. You, in fact, had dates on your website. But I'm just kind of curious, are you still leveraging bands in town? And I'm asking in part because I heard it come up recently in a different context about some cool things they were doing. Are you still using it? Does it work? And what do you like about it, if there is anything that stands out?
Bands in Town feeds to a lot of other sites.
Hmm.
So if you add it there, it shows up on other sites. So always try to use pages like that. Like Songkick is the same, it feeds to Spotify, and so forth. And I have it as an extra link. I list the gigs or the shows, on my site no matter what. But if for some reason they're not showing up or not showing up right, there's another option for people to find it. Plus, Bands in Town has a followers, so that you get notifications, So because I mean, there's so much to choose from, and there's so much that comes at people, especially in the digital world that we're in, at any given moment. So I think the more awareness there is for shows, either publicity wise or through being on one of those lists, the better.
Yeah,
So
sure.
that people get the word gets out. It's hard to get the word out. You miss a lot because there's so much going on.
Absolutely. Well, and the last thing I wanted to ask you about is Making Sound, the podcast.
Hmm.
And it was really, I think I know the why, but if there is more to it than what you've already said, I'd love to know why you started it. A little bit more about the format. It looks like you do some interviews, maybe not exclusively, I'm not sure. And to ask you also, how's it going and what do you see for it for the future? Or is it getting maybe pushed down in the priority list a little bit because touring's coming back up?
Yeah, because that's a great question. So I really started enjoying doing it. It was out of necessity because I had very little else to do, and I thought, oh, this is going to be a fun thing. And I've always wanted to do something like that. I used to tape myself interviewing my friends, when I was a kid. And I had these imaginary shows, and I was the guest and the interviewer, and I would just make up all these stories, and I loved doing it. It was really like I entertained myself with it, and so then to make that a real thing, and maybe that's because I had that practice, because I was doing it, it came very easy to me, and it was really fun. And of course, everyone was available. That was the greatest thing. 2 years ago, when you called somebody, like I would call my famous friends and be like, hey, I'm doing this podcast. Will you be a guest on it? And literally everyone responded with yes. But of course, they had nothing else to do. So it didn't make me feel special, but it made me feel encouraged to just give it a go and see what happens. And then we had a dozen episodes or so booked. So, and they were all like well-known artists, and I thought, wow, kind of cool that I have met all these people, and we have a lot to talk about, and right now everyone has a lot to vent about, because everyone was stressing about life.
Sure.
And so it was a great outlet, and the stories, some of them are great stories, like I have like Rock Hall of Famers on my show, and new people that nobody knows, and everyone's got a story, everyone. And I try to get into that. I don't want to. I'm not interested in hearing about your latest release and where can I buy it and I'm so awesome. And, I don't want to talk about that. Like, I want to know what drives you. I want to know what your struggles are, like what was difficult, because that's what we learn. That's where I can learn something. That's where I think the listener can really learn something from the star or the guest, and it's a lot, like Annie Haslam from Renaissance. We've known each other a long time. We've collaborated. We've recorded together, and she was like, "Okay, I have 30 minutes to do this," and I was like, "Okay, great. Anytime you want to give me is fine." And we ended up talking for an hour and a half, and it just becomes a conversation, kind of like we're backstage, after a show, and we're just hanging out. And I've had so many moments like that where I've met some really interesting people. Some of them are known, some of them are not. And I have these great conversations, and I walk away and go, wow, that was really inspiring. That made me think about my own life and inspired me to do something or change something in my life. And I wish I would have recorded that conversation. So that was the motivation behind making sound. And I used a phrase that my voice teacher, I also coach voice now. I work with singers and produce and so forth. But my voice teacher in Cleveland, David Gooding, we used to sit there in these voice lessons and go, this is how I got the title for the podcast. I stole it from him, and I told him too. And he was like, should I ask for royalties? And I said, no, you shouldn't. But then, we're all like like listener supported. I don't have advertisers, and on purpose. So he would say, what we're doing is we're making sound in reference to singing.
Sure.
And I was like, that's a great phrase. So the guest opens every show with, hi, I'm so-and-so. And what we're doing is we're making sound. And so, I just had Howard Bloom, who was Prince's, Michael Jackson, Billy Joel, Kiss, you name it. He was their publicist in the 80s. Like, he was the guy. And I just let him go off on talking about Prince, because I'm a huge Prince fan. And he just talked for an hour about how he went to the screening for Purple Rain and how Warner Brothers didn't want to release it to a wider audience, and they only wanted to put it into 10 theaters. And Howard Bloom said, no, you're wrong. And he convinced Warner Brothers to put it in 100 theaters. And that broke Prince. It made him a star. He was known before that, but he wasn't known. He wasn't a star. He wasn't like, so it's just small stuff like that like is such an interesting environment, to be in, to talk to people like that, because, I learn a lot, and I love that. So that's the show. And now, yes, I'm still doing it because it started charting, and it started just doing well enough where I felt like, why stop it? I'm having fun doing it. I mean, I'm not making any money doing it, but who cares? Maybe one day I will. It's still a passion project, but I get to talk to great people, and I get to meet a lot of new people. Like this weekend, I'm playing at the Island Hopper Songwriters Festival, which is a BMI Songwriters Festival in Florida, in the Fort Myers area. I mean, this will air after that, but I reached out to some of the artists, and I said, hey, you want to be on my show? So I'm doing that as well. So I'm doing both. I'm doing the shows. I'm playing 4 shows, and I'm also talking to the other artists that are at the festival.
Very nice. On location or near location interviews. On location. I like it.
Yeah.
That's very cool. Well, I'm compelled to listen, and I think you probably did a great pitch, not even trying to, for anyone who hears this, to check out your podcast, and I will definitely do so. I regret not having listened to it yet. Jann, it was a pleasure talking with you. I really appreciate your time today. Yeah, thanks. And then, again, for everyone who wants to know more about Jann, JannKlose.com, JANNKLOSE. All of his work and socials are there. You're crushing it on social, by the way, I noticed. So,
well, I try.
You're doing a good job, man. Thanks again. Great talking with you.
Appreciate it.
This episode was powered by Bandzoogle, the platform for musicians and bands to build a great website, manage direct-to-fan marketing and sales. Bandzoogle features great design options, a commission-free store to sell music, merch, and tickets, and so much more. Try it free at bandzoogle.com and use the promo code ROBONZO, ROBONZO, to get 15% off your first year. And I'll put a link to all that in the show notes, of course. If you love what I do, if you find value in what I do here on the podcast, please visit unstarvingmusician.com/crowd sponsor or the show notes for this episode to learn about options for offering your support. The Unstarving Musician accepts direct financial support, and we very much appreciate it, but there are several other ways to support the podcast and help keep it going. Again, you can learn more about those options for supporting the Unstarving Musician podcast at unstarvingmusician.com/crowd sponsor. Please help others find the Unstarving Musician podcast by following or subscribing on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. It really does help. And if you have feedback, please go to unstarvingmusician.com to get all my contact info. You can text me, call me, email me, leave a voice message right there on that page. Just go down to the bottom of the page and you'll find everything you need to know. I really would love to hear any of your comments, suggestions, questions, whatever you've got. And you can find links to just about everything talked about in this episode at unstarvingmusician.com/podcast. All right, I'm peacing out. Thank you for listening and sharing with your musician friends and fellow indie music fans. Peace, gratitude, and a whole lot of love.